Welcome to Roundabout Oxford, a podcast from the University of Mississippi Libraries.
Jonathan Reckford is not only the CEO of Habitat for Humanity International, but also the 2021 commencement speaker for the University of Mississippi and an author in his own right. Mr. Reckford joins us to talk about themes from his book, Our Better Angels, 7 Simple Virtues That Will Change Your Life and the World, as well as his impressions of Mississippi and the virtues of kindness and respect. My name is Alex Watson. I am a research and instruction librarian and associate professor at the University of Mississippi Libraries. Joining me here today is Mr. Jonathan Reckford. Thank you for joining us. For those of us who aren't familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're coming from?
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be with you. I am a product of public education as well, a different state university, but grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. My father was a classics professor at UNC and fourth of 5 kids. And other than a year in England when he was in sabbatical, it was a wonderful place to grow up. And I studied political science and English in college and was planning to go to law school and go into politics because one of my great role models in my life was my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had been one of the early women in the U.S. Congress and a passionate fighter for civil and human rights. And every time I'd seen her growing up, she would challenge her grandchildren first by quoting her favorite verse from the Bible, Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. And then she would ask us what we were going to do to be useful. And I thought that was her vision of the good life, is we're supposed to be useful. And so I realized I had no interest in being a lawyer and had to find something else to do. Talked my way into a job at Goldman Sachs in corporate finance, and then suffered mightily for the hubris of saying that I would learn finance faster than they could teach other people how to communicate. And it was a great learning experience, but probably not the right fit for me. And I realized I just wasn't living the kind of life I had imagined. And one of the big inflection points for me was the chance with the Henry Luce Foundation to spend a year working in Asia. So I left New York and spent a year working for the Olympic Organizing Committee in Seoul, and then ended up, through a longer story I won't tell, coaching the Korean rowing team and living in the training camp with the Korean coaches and athletes. And that year was a year where I had so much distance in the pre-internet, pre-email era to think about my life, think about my faith, and came back from that year really wanting to do something with a mission that mattered. And that led to first going to business school at Stanford, which was one of the only business schools that believed at that point that we needed professional management in the nonprofit space. And then while in business school, came to believe that there weren't that many immediate paths in the nonprofit world. So went to the private sector with the idea of learning skills that I could then bring across. And had an unexpected but very interesting series of jobs with Marriott, with Disney, with Circuit City Stores, helping take CarMax public, and then as president of a big chain of music and movie stores. But at the last step in my business career, the company I was working with was acquired, and I thought it was really now time to make that switch. And the next inflection point was the chance to travel in India and have a long period of being at home with my kids and spending family time. And that was a really important discernment period where seeing the depths of poverty in rural India really broke my heart all over again around justice issues. And I came back from that not knowing exactly what I would do, but really wanting to focus on international poverty. And that led unexpectedly to a long waiting period. And I had been a volunteer in many churches, helping churches grow. And that led to my church asking if I would help lead the church. And it wasn't what I was looking to do, but was a great balance for my corporate career to be ready for when I wasn't looking a couple of years later, when Habitat for Humanity came calling. And now for 16 years, I've had the incredible privilege of leading Habitat for Humanity, which if I could pick one organization that merged my goals of avocation and vocation, it really would have been Habitat, where I found that mission that mattered. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
All right, wonderful. It sounds like Habitat for Humanity was the perfect habitat for you, given all of the background that you've told us about.
It really has. I love the tangible aspect. To me, housing is such a fundamental need right after, we all need food, we need clothing, and we need shelter as at the most basic level. And to me, not just the physical need for shelter for people, but also even the way Habitat does it of breaking down barriers and bringing people together to create community change also really drew me as well. So I really loved getting to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Well, is this the sort of thing that led you to want to write your book?
I wasn't looking to write the book, but in some ways it came to me, but it got me excited. We had collaborated with President Carter on an op-ed after Hurricane Harvey. And if you're, for people who remember, devastating storm that did so much damage in Texas and beyond. And so in the aftermath of that, President Carter wrote that the way people behave after a disaster is so powerful. Suddenly you don't care that your neighbor is of a different race or religion or background. You're just so excited that they're there to help you. And then his question was, why can't we act like that all the time? And so the comment, quoting President Lincoln, is we need to see our better angels come out. And so when the waters rise, so do our better angels. And a publisher saw that op-ed and approached me and asked if we would turn that into a book. He thought that was a very timely message for all the polarization in our world. And that was the beginning of it. The challenge, of course, was finding time to do it. Initially, we were going to co-author it, which I was really excited about. And then President Carter's other publisher threw a fit. And so he asked if he could only write the foreword. And I thought that might be the end of the book, but they were still interested in moving forward. So I would say the challenging aspect of that was one, time, and two, distilling down among all the things that we could talk about, and even trying to pick which virtues to talk about. But I think the most fun part of that was then the chance to reflect on the stories that had been so impactful to me and that I'd been able to see of both lives changed of volunteers as well as lives changed in communities because of people demonstrating these virtues.
Your focus on the virtues then was something that spun off from your op-ed with President Carter about trying to turn acute generosity into chronic generosity and getting that sort of spirit of togetherness and giving moved from just something that happens in the immediate aftermath of a major disaster to something people continuously do throughout their lives. Would that be a correct way of putting that?
It's a lovely way of putting it. Exactly. That I think we all have that compassion, and it gets triggered in certain circumstances. But then we also look and you see, I think there's never been a time, I just saw some recent data that showed Americans have never been more discouraged in certainly modern history about the level of polarization and divide in our country. And so I think in some ways there's some urgency to that too, in terms of how we create some of that change.
Definitely. Two of the virtues that you mentioned specifically are kindness and respect. Those are definitely things that the University of Mississippi hopes to build on, particularly here in Oxford. How would you like to see people embracing those virtues more in their daily lives?
I think first, which I'm sure will resonate if for those listeners who are like me and are very tired of doing life virtually, I think the first step is how does that happen relationally and in person? And I think there is such a hunger for community. And in some ways, if we want community, they have to be built on kindness and respect. And I think in some ways, the first thing I would say is severely limit your use of social media. And I think for our Generation Z, they are digital natives. And there's so many good things that have come out of being digital natives. But I've increasingly see social media as pouring gasoline on the divides rather than bringing people together. It's dominated by the most extreme voices. People have found they get attention by creating rage and anger and fear rather than creating unity and engagement. So I think the first step to me is for people to make it personal. And second, both online and in face-to-face encounters, think about ways, it becomes infectious if people are treated kindly. it tends to build, and you see kindness come back. I was just listening to Arthur Brooks, who I think is so brilliant on this in his book, Love Your Enemies. And he talked about the worst combination is a combination of anger and disgust, and that creates contempt. And I think we start seeing that, which is we see the other as not someone who just disagrees with me, but they must be a bad person. And if you hold someone in contempt, it's almost impossible to have a relationship. I think the antidote to that is respect and kindness, which doesn't mean you agree with people who may have very different viewpoints, but it changes the way you think about having a relationship with them. And so to me, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, embracing that respect and kindness and that possibility of learning from the other person, that I don't think you have to in any way give up your values or even give up your opinions, but going in with an openness to the idea that, especially in a campus environment, you could learn something different or stretch your viewpoint or be expanded. Just the practice of thinking daily about how could you do something kind for someone else can actually change the wiring in your brain. So I think actually practicing those small acts of kindness for others increases our gratitude, increases our positive, and then we start seeing that really become viral in a positive way. And to me, that's certainly the environment you'd love to see on campuses all across the country at a time where there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger.
Definitely. As a millennial who has done his fair share of doom scrolling, that certainly resonates with me personally. Now, before we began, you mentioned your time visiting the University of Mississippi this spring in order to participate in our commencement. In the course of your time visiting the University of Mississippi or in interacting with any of our folks, have you been able to see any instances of outstanding kindness and respect of the sort that you're hoping to cultivate with your book?
I had such a short visit, but it was such a wonderful visit. And, Alex, for me, it was the first actually live speech I got to give in over a year at that point to a live audience and not just online. And it was so energizing from that perspective. And I love talking to students. I would say that the main thing I experienced was the kindness side of just extraordinary hospitality and sort of from, the respect of the way that people were, whether that came to just wearing masks and social distancing and trying to make sure it was a healthy environment for one another, and just the kindness I certainly experienced in terms of both from students and faculty and the administration in terms of hosting me were certainly striking. I look forward to hopefully spending more time on campus and getting to know it better. But the whole experience was an incredibly positive one for me.
To build on what you were just saying, we've got a group of freshmen that are entering the university right now, right as we're recording this. And as you say, a very unsettled, a very divided time. If you could give them some advice, what would you say to these 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are just now setting foot into the university world?
The first thing I would say is this is such an exciting time to learn and grow. I remember when I went to business school, and it was funny, I didn't share this goal broadly, but I thought every person in my class has a story. And I hope over the next 2 years, I want to hear every story I can and just try to understand and assume that if someone's there, they must have an interesting story that got them there. And not to fall into the temptation of only hanging out with the people from your hometown or the people that are the most like you, which is easy to do, but intentionally look for the chances to be enriched by people who might disagree with you or challenge you with new ideas. Seek out faculty members who might have different perspectives. And that doesn't mean in any way giving up your values. I think quite the opposite. This is a time for re-anchoring and thinking about what are the most fundamental values that you're going to build your life on, but how do you use this time to be shaped and to build the relationships with others? And I think you have a chance to build lifelong friendships. You have a chance to truly mature at a different level where you really get to make the choices now. In many ways, your parents had a bigger role, certainly at this point, the first half of your life. As you get into high school, to the dismay of, as a parent, I would say to slight dismay, you realize that your parental influence wanes and your friends' influence increases. And in college, that's even further down that arc. So to me, this is a chance to think about One of the axioms I use at work all the time is we should be religious about our principles, but flexible in our tactics. And I think there's a chance here to kind of double down on trying to think, what are those guiding principles that are going to be most important, and those lines you're never going to cross. But then how do you have an openness to seeing a big and different world in new ways, which is one of the great gifts of college. So I hope for those freshmen, this is one of those oasis moments that really prepares them to go out into the big world. When I sat down to write the book and listen to others and think about it, the themes I was really thinking about, and it seems even more true a couple years later, is that it felt like there were two worlds. There was the world of the national news, where you just see all these tragedies and so much fear and discord and polarization. And then there's the world I was seeing at Habitat for Humanity, where success was redefined from how much we earn to how much we grow, how much we help each other, how deeply we connect to the communities we call home, and seeing these extraordinary examples of individuals making their communities better. And for me, I think that my observation out of that is, one, we're all hungry for community. And it's not always the most efficient way to build a house to have a bunch of unskilled volunteers come together to build it. But what you experience, and I think the reason I and so many others come back, is you experience that sense of community where people are coming together against all these different barriers and building relationship and building community as they do something practical. And so I think, circling back to your early question, in many ways, I think service is the antidote to so many of the challenges. That when we serve others, it's that chance to really connect at a community level. It's a chance to be reminded of what we have in common with others rather than what separates us. And I think that can make such a difference. I could tell lots of stories, but one of my heroes, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, sponsored a build for years in South Africa with Habitat for Humanity. And he said, as the physical walls of the house go up, the invisible walls that separate us as people come tumbling down, and hope is built in the community. And I think we have such a hunger for that now. And I think then the challenge is, for each of us, what can we do to be one of those hope builders? And to me, finding that way to serve and look for the good in others is the starting point for the kind of community we all want to be a part of.
Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us today. We appreciate your time very much, and we hope that you will have the opportunity to visit the University of Mississippi again in the near-term future, hopefully in circumstances that don't require a mask, a NBC suit, or anything like that.
I look forward to that, Alex. Great to be with you.
Roundabout Oxford was developed and produced by Brian Corrigan, Taylor Fields, Alan Munchauer, Abigail Norris, Christina Streeter, and Alex Watson. This episode was narrated by Gail Herrera and Alex Watson. Thank you for listening to Roundabout Oxford.